The knock at the door. I knew it was my mother before I opened the door. There are some people your body remembers before your mind agrees to. The knock was light, almost polite, but it landed in my chest like a warning. 3 short taps, then silence. I dried my hands on a dish towel and stood in the hallway longer than I should have, staring at the brass handle like it had become something dangerous. When I finally opened the door, there she was. Diane. 9 years older, a little thinner, her hair more gray than brown now, but still carrying herself with that neat, composed kind of confidence she used when she wanted control to look like Grace. She was smiling, though not warmly. In one hand, she held a large manila envelope, bent slightly at the corners like she had been gripping it too hard. For a second, neither of us spoke. My stomach dropped so fast, I had to steady myself against the frame. She looked past me once into the house, as if checking whether she approved of what my life had become. Then she said, calm as if she had seen me last month instead of nearly a decade ago, "Lena, I need to talk to you." I said nothing. She lifted the envelope a little. "It's about the family. The family. Not I'm sorry. Not can we talk. Not I know I don't deserve this. The family." Behind me, I could hear the dryer turning over in the laundry room and the soft thud of my husband setting something down in the kitchen. The ordinary sounds of the life I had built without her made the moment feel even stranger, like something unwelcome had crossed a border and expected recognition. I looked at the envelope, then back at her face, and understood with cold certainty that she had not come here for peace. She had come here for something. 9 years of silence. The last time I had seen my mother before that day on my porch, I was wearing a white dress and trying not to cry in a church parking lot. My wedding day should have been simple. Not extravagant, not grand, just full of the people who were supposed to love me. James stood inside in a navy suit, steady and handsome, and trying to look calmer than he felt. My best friend was pinning flowers into her daughter's hair. The pastor had already asked twice whether we were ready to begin, and I was still looking at my phone. By then, I already knew my family wasn't coming. My mother had made that clear 3 days earlier when she called my marriage a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. My aunt said she couldn't support this kind of mistake. My brother never even answered, but some foolish part of me kept hoping that when the hour came, blood would matter more than pride, more than prejudice, more than whatever poison they had fed themselves about the man I loved. Then my father called. I stepped away from the church doors to answer, because I still believed there might be one last chance for mercy. There wasn't. His voice was flat, colder than I had ever heard it. He told me if I married James, I was making my choice permanent. He said I was throwing away my upbringing, my name, my family. And then, in the same tone someone might use to discuss weather or bills, he said, if you walk into that church with him, you're dead to us. I can still hear the exact silence that came after. Not because the world stopped. It didn't. Cars kept passing. Someone inside the church laughed. A little girl dropped a program, and her mother picked it up. Everything ordinary kept moving while my entire family erased me in one sentence. I married James anyway. What else was I supposed to do? Betray the one person who stood in front of me with love and honesty because the people behind me demanded I shrink into their hatred? So I walked into that church, and when I came back out, I no longer had parents. Not really. We built a life without them after that. Quietly at first. Carefully. James worked, I worked, and together we built something solid enough to live in and soft enough to heal in. We learned which holidays to make our own, which traditions to keep, which wounds to stop reopening. But no matter how peaceful your life becomes, there is something brutal about knowing your family could look at love and call a mistake. And for 9 years, they let that be the last word, the demand. I did not invite her in right away. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door mostly shut behind me, leaving only a narrow space where the house still breathed around me. My mother noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes flicked to the gap, then back to my face, as if she were measuring how much access I intended to give her. Whatever this is, I said, you can say it out here. Something tight passed over her expression, but she recovered quickly. I'm not here to fight, Lena. That would have meant more if she had ever arrived in my life any other way. She held out the manila envelope. For one irrational second, I wondered if it might be a letter. Something old, maybe handwritten, some late, awkward attempt at regret. But the weight of it felt wrong in my hands a moment I took it. Too stiff, too formal. I opened the flap and pulled out a stack of papers clipped neatly together. The first page had a bold heading centered at the top. Repayment for family damages. I stared at the words without understanding them. Below there was an itemized list. Lost business relationships. Canceled social commitments. Emotional distress to immediate family members. Community, standing, and reputational harm. Counseling expenses. Event losses. At the bottom, a total. $50,000. For a moment, I honestly thought this had to be some kind of joke. Not a funny one. Not even a cruel one. Just something so detached from reality that my mind rejected it before my emotions could catch up. I looked up at her. What is this? My mother folded her hands in front of her purse with the same composed posture she used at funerals and church luncheons, the one that made her look almost fragile to people who didn't know her. It's what you owe, she said. The air went completely still around me. I'm sorry. You heard me. Her voice sharpened. When you married James, you humiliated this family. People talked. Your father lost standing with clients. Invitations stopped coming. We had to spend years repairing the damage you caused. I looked back down at the page, then at her again, waiting for the absurdity of it to reach her face. It never did. You came to my house, I said slowly, after 9 years, to hand me a bill. It's not a bill, she snapped. It's accountability. Accountability. My throat felt tight with disbelief. You disowned me, and you forced our hand, she fired back. Do you think choices don't have consequences? Do you think we were supposed to smile while you dragged our name through the mud? There was not grief, not reconciliation, not even desperation dressed up as family concern. A debt. In her mind, my marriage had not been my life. It had been an injury done to them, and now she had come to collect. I looked at the total one more time, at the clean-typed numbers and legal-looking formatting, and understood something that somehow hurt more than the silence had. 9 years had changed nothing. They still believed I was the one who had done something wrong. And my mother had come to my doorstep expecting me to pay for the privilege of being rejected. The investigation. I let her finish talking because there's a point in some conversations where outrage becomes useless and information becomes everything. When my mother finally left, she did it with the offended dignity of someone who believed she had been treated unfairly. She told me to think carefully before embarrassing the family further. Then she walked down my front path in low beige heels, got into a silver sedan I did not recognize, and drove away like she had just delivered a formal notice instead of a delusion. I stood in the doorway holding that envelope long after her car was gone. James came up behind me quietly. He did not ask if I was okay, because after 9 years together, he knew some questions only make pain perform itself. He took the papers from my hand, read the heading once, and muttered, "What the hell is this?" That was exactly the right question. By midnight, I had my laptop open and the pages spread across the dining table. If my mother had expected shock to do her work for her, she had forgotten one thing about me. Once something stops making emotional sense, I start looking for the practical one. The formatting on the so-called repayment document was strange. Too polished in some places, sloppy in others. One line listed social losses with no explanation. Another claimed private counseling expenses in a flat amount that looked rounded, invented. There was no law firm letterhead, no official filing number, no signature from anyone qualified to enforce anything. It was intimidation dressed as paperwork. Then my phone buzzed. My sister, Rachel. We had not spoken much over the years, but unlike our parents, she had never fully slammed the door. Mostly she hovered at the edges of family disasters, saying little, surviving quietly. Her message was short. Did Mom come to your house? I stared at it for a second, then typed back. Yes. Why? Asterisk, asterisk. The response came almost immediately. Because she's broke. She spent 50 grand last month on a facelift and recovery package. She thought you'd panic and pay. She's desperate. Asterisk, asterisk. I read that text 3 times. Then Rachel sent screenshots. a wire transfer, a clinic name in another state, hotel charges, cosmetic aftercare, private driver fees. My mother had not come to collect family damages. She had come to refinance vanity through guilt. I sat back in my chair and felt something inside me go very still. Not shocked anymore. Not even hurt in the old way. Just clear. This was not about family. It was about a woman who had burned a bridge 9 years ago and now expected to cross the ashes with an invoice. The gaslighting. My mother called the next morning at 7:12, as if waking early somehow made her righteous. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was already thick with tears. "Lena," she said, "I barely slept. I didn't want it to come to this." I said nothing. That usually unsettled people like her more than anger ever could. She took a shaky breath. "You were always the difficult one. Even as a child, everything had to be your way. We loved you, but you made things impossible. And then you chose him over us. Him, not James. Never James." As if reducing my husband to a pronoun could erase the fact that he had spent 9 years giving me the loyalty my own family never could. "You disowned me," I said. Her crying sharpened. "Because you left us no choice. You made a spectacle of this family. Your father was devastated. We all were. And now, after everything, you still can't take responsibility." Responsibility. That word again. They loved it because it let them dress cruelty in moral clothing. By noon, my sister had texted, "Just pay her. It's easier. Asterisk, asterisk." I stared at the screen so long it dimmed in my hand. Easier. That was always their preferred solution. Not truth. Not justice. Not apology. Just whatever kept the family myth intact and the loudest person satisfied. A second text came in before I could answer. She says, "Dad's blood pressure is bad. Do you really want this on your conscience?" Asterisk, asterisk. There it was. Guilt, fear, obligation, all wrapped up like I was still 26 and desperate to be let back inside a house that had thrown me out. For a few minutes, I felt it. That old pull. The childhood instinct to smooth things over, to pay the emotional bill just to stop the punishment. Then James came into the kitchen, took one look at my face, and asked quietly, "What did they say now?" I handed him the phone. He read both messages, set it down carefully, and said the one thing no one in my blood family ever had. "You don't owe cruelty rent just because it raised you." And just like that, the fog lifted. They didn't miss me. They missed control. The viral post. I didn't go live because I wanted attention. I went live because I was tired of people like my mother surviving on private lies. By that evening, I had laid everything out on the kitchen table. The invoice. Screenshots of my sister's texts. The old messages from my mother before the wedding. The voicemail my father left the night he told me I was dead to them. Even the wedding album James and I had paid for ourselves, full of smiling faces and one visible absence that still hurt if I looked too long. James asked if I was sure. I looked at the stack of papers and said, "If I handle this quietly, they'll turn it into my shame again." So I propped my phone against a sugar jar, opened Facebook Live, and waited as the little red light blinked on. For the first few seconds, hardly anyone joined. Then a few names popped up. Old classmates, a cousin, 2 neighbors. I took a breath and began. "My name is Lena Whitmore, and 9 years ago my family disowned me for marrying a black man." I held up the invoice next. "Today my mother came to my house and demanded $50,000 in what she called repayment for family damages. According to her, my marriage cost them business, social standing, and emotional distress." The comments started moving immediately. I read the invoice aloud line by line, slowly, clearly, letting every ugly word hang in the air exactly the way she had intended it to hang over me. Then I showed the texts. "You chose him over us. Just pay her. It's easier. Asterisk, asterisk. Dad's blood pressure is bad. Do you really want this on your conscience? Asterisk, asterisk." After that, I reached for the wedding album. "I want you to understand something," I said. "These are the photos from the wedding they refused to attend. This is the day they told me I was dead to them." I turned pages toward the camera. James waiting at the altar. My best friend fixing my veil. The empty front pews where my parents should have been. Me smiling in a white dress with the kind of smile people where when they're trying to look less abandoned than they feel. By then, the viewer count had jumped so fast, I stopped tracking it. People were tagging others in the comments. Someone wrote, "I know this family." Another wrote, "Post the invoice again." A former teacher commented, "I always wondered why they cut you off. I'm so sorry." Asterisk asterisk, then came the messages from people I didn't know at all, women saying their families had punished them too, men saying they had watched their wives go through the same thing. The live was no longer just mine. It had become evidence. When I ended the video, 40 minutes later, it already had thousands of shares. By midnight, local pages had reposted it. By morning, people were pulling up old church committee photos, business listings, charity gala pictures, connecting the polished public family to the private cruelty I had finally named out loud. My mother wanted a payment. Instead, I handed her a mirror. The aftermath. The fallout moved faster than I expected and slower than it deserved. By the second day, my mother's church had released a carefully worded statement about values inconsistent with the spirit of fellowship. People who had spent years praising Diane for her poise and devotion were suddenly pretending they had always sensed something colder underneath. She was removed from 2 committees before the week was over. A women's ministry leader I barely remembered sent me a message, saying she had watched the live twice and cried both times. I did not answer. Some apologies arrived too late to be about you at all. My sister blocked me everywhere by Tuesday afternoon. Not because I had lied, because I had stopped lying for them. A cousin reached out privately to say my father had refused to leave the house since the video spread. Another relative told me my mother kept saying I had humiliated the family. Even then, even after all that evidence, she still believed exposure was the crime. The strangest part was how calm I felt. Not happy, not triumphant, just clear. A few days later, I drove to the credit union where James and I keep our savings and opened a separate fund in the exact amount my mother demanded. $50,000. I could have kept it symbolic and left it there, but symbolism felt too small after 9 years of silence. So I donated every cent to a scholarship program for interracial couples who had been cut off or financially abandoned by their families for choosing each other. Rent assistance, emergency relocation, legal fees, counseling. The kinds of things love should never have to fight for, but often does. When I signed the transfer forms, I thought about that invoice with its neat little total at the bottom. My mother had wanted to put a price on my marriage, my pain, and my removal from the family story. Fine. Now, that number belonged to something better. James took me for coffee afterward, and we sat in the car for a minute before going inside. He squeezed my hand once, and I realized I no longer felt like the daughter left on a church parking lot, waiting for people who had already chosen not to come. Some families only love you when you're quiet. I'd rather be loud.